All right, folks, get ready. We're going to run the ropes, take a drop kick, and watch for that clothesline. We're talking about wrestling moves today here on Falls Count Anywhere.
Welcome back to the latest and greatest episode of Wrestling with the Business Falls Count Anywhere. We had some fan requests. Like language was a bit of a barrier, which we addressed a few episodes ago.
Yep.
We have another bit of encyclopedia-related question here on wrestling moves. What are they? What do they look like? Where do they come from? And so I put together a list of 15, sort of some of the more high-risk, complex, advanced, difficult, dangerous, in some instances, moves. Some moves that you might not recognize the name of. We'll give those alternatives.
You'd recognize them when you see them.
Yeah, or maybe they're foreign, so you kind of might hear an announcer say it and be like, oh, what the heck that is, or, you know, sometimes the announcers are a little slow on the uptake too, or they might come out with, they might give you a different name for it, which might create some confusion. So I thought it might be interesting, work with the professor again, test him a little bit like we did before, and just see what comes of it. So you ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right. So also, I'm going to try to include some videos of these moves because, you know, we're going to provide descriptions and stuff like that, but a picture's worth 1,000 words. So if you can see it, then that's going to help you a lot, sort of visualize what it is we're talking about. And I think you're going to get an idea for the level of danger we're talking about here. So, all right, up first, number one.
First of all, kids, don't try these at home. Okay, now we're safe.
Not that we didn't not try them at home, because we totally did. All right, this one is called a Meteora.
Ooh.
What is a Meteora?
When that's done right, that looks so good. Meteora is double knees, usually from a standing position or from the top rope to another standing opponent and just driving them to the mat.
Yeah, it's called a diving double knee drop.
Oh, that is a good... Again, when it's done right, it looks so good.
It looks like a stomp. You know, you see people do it from the aprons a lot, especially... This seems to be more of a lady move. It seems to be more women.
Sasha Banks, a.k.a. Mercedes Moné, she does that move a lot. She was probably one of the first ones I actually saw do it. Buddy Matthews does it a lot. He does it so... His looks so nice when he does it.
But you see springboard versions off the ropes. You see slingshot versions, which look particularly good. And, of course, you can do standing or running versions. Now, some interesting... Do you know where it comes from?
I'm going to say with a lot of these, Japan.
That's a decent guess. Invented by CIMA.
Oh, yeah.
CIMA. CIMA, for those of you at home.
He's actually Chinese.
Who used both, a springboard and a top rope version in Dragon Gate. And it's actually named after the Greek landmark at which he proposed to his wife. Meteora, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's like this Greek... I think there's like a temple on top of like this weird plateau. It's very iconic, though. If you look up a picture of it, it's beautiful.
Interesting.
But yeah, that's actually where it comes from. Matt Sydal is also
Matt Sydal, yep.
Is also, I think that's one of his signature moves. So very interesting. Looks great. I think it's relatively safe though, as long as the knees don't land directly on the chest. I think it's pretty safe. All right, let's go classic. Diving elbow drop. Yes, that's the old... Who made that one popular?
Oh, I want to say Macho Man, but I'm sure it was done before that.
Macho Man is sort of that was sort of his popular one. I mean, it was a pretty common move back in the day just because very few moves were done off the top ropes. Obviously, high risk. You know, when you're working the circuit, not a lot of medical support out there. And it was typically done as a finisher. If you're going to go to the top rope, that indicated it's the end of the match.
Right.
Not so much anymore. But we saw it from, Kairi Sane.
Kairi Sane. Oh, hers
did it
phenomenal.
a
Yeah.
lot. Bailey used it a lot, especially early. Not really so much anymore, but especially early in her career.
Yeah,
she
that
did
was
a lot.
her tribute to Macho Man.
Yeah, this was a Macho Man signature move. It's one that I'm sure everybody watching this show has seen before. It's kind of iconic. And, man, when they get air and he goes, like, clear across the ring, he's getting 12, 13 feet.
Yep.
That looks really, really cool. All right. Let's go into the danger zone a little bit here. Diving headbutt.
Oof. Dynamite Kid, Chris Benoit, Dax Harwood today, he does that. Just exactly what it sounds. Go off the top rope and just land head first onto your opponent.
And this is one of those moves that definitely hurts the doer more than the doee. There were actually some pretty significant claims that doing that move repeatedly over and over again actually contributed to Chris Benoit's CTE, which obviously led to
everything he did led to a concussion.
That tragedy. Yeah, he definitely was not a guy that was all about safety. And actually, there was a stretch where it was actually outlawed by the WWE. It was like a 10-year, I want to say, from basically the end of Chris Benoit's life until probably 2015, 2018, something like that. Actually, it was accidentally invented by Harley Race.
Oh, yeah, I think I heard that before.
One of those happy accidents. So, yeah, you mentioned the Dynamite Kid, Chris Benoit, Bam Bam Bigelow.
Yep.
Devon Dudley.
Yep.
Another big user of that one. And even, most recently, Daniel Bryan making that a signature
of course.
move of his.
Bryan Danielson in AEW.
But yeah, they found, and it wasn't just like CTE related stuff. I mean, that's the obvious one, but spine related injuries, even leg or chest damage from landing from that far out.
Really doesn't do much damage to the person receiving it, just the person doing it.
Not at all. I mean, unless you're aiming for someone's crotch, I'm not even sure how it could.
Yeah.
I mean, it might knock the wind out of you, but nothing bad. All right. Let's do something a little bit funner, if that's a word.
It is now.
High angle senton bomb.
Oof.
Otherwise known as the swanton bomb.
The swanton, yeah. I mean, Jeff Hardy made that famous. Again, if done properly, beautiful dive off of the top rope.
Yeah, I think the signature of the swanton is that you literally have to look like a swan when you're taking
swan
off.
Dive.
So you're jumping up as high as you can, arm spread eagle, leg spread on him. And if you catch a shot
Arch in the back
of Jeff Hardy in the air with that, you're like, what is this guy doing? And then all of a sudden,
who does it really well now is Wardlow. He does that perfect form.
Yeah. And you what you do is you go up in the air, almost like you're parachuting, almost like you're skydiving. And just as you come down at the last second, you tuck your head in, you bring it around. And I think with the swanton bomb, he usually lands on the back of his neck on his opponent.
Yep. Not so much anymore.
Actually, you brought up Wardlow. He had that match with Christian Cage. He did the swanton with Christian on the table, and he actually Luchasaurus. He missed, right?
Yep.
It was with Christian, but Lucha came in. And he kind of missed and put himself through the second table.
Yeah.
Again, another one of those moves where it pretty clearly hurts the doer more than it hurts the doee.
Absolutely.
But it looks really great.
Again, unless Jeff Hardy's doing it now where he lands full body on his opponent. Oof.
A little bit safer for him. Invented by the great Sasuke.
Okay.
Who called it the Senton Atomico. All right, let's go classic again. Frog Splash.
Eddie Guerrero.
Very fun. It's got to be Eddie, right?
Yep. Where you actually bend yourself in half, like do a little frog move in the air, and then splash on your opponent.
You literally look from the top ropes. It's the same style as sort of the elbow drop, where you're jumping, and again, some guys are going clear across the ring. You're like, how did he not hit his head on the opposing turnbuckle? Straight across the ring, lands. Something iconic about that move, in that every time it's done, you know it's coming. You just see 1,000 flashing lights in the background because everybody wants to get the perfect shot.
And no one makes it look as good as Eddie did.
No, nobody
Not
did.
as crisp and clean.
Nobody did. So the move itself was invented by La Fiera in Mexico in the early 80s. So it's actually very old.
Yeah.
But Art Barr borrowed it in the late 80s.
And that's where Eddie got it from.
And it was actually named by Too Cold Scorpio, who said that Barr looked like a frog when he did it.
Interesting.
But yeah, a lot of people have adopted it, specifically, most probably famously Christian Cage, ever since Eddie died. He kind of made that one of his. And of course, Hiroshi Tanahashi. I think he calls it something different, though. I've got it in my notes here. High Fly Flow.
Yep.
Is what he calls it. Now, there's a variation on this one, which is a high angle turning variation.
Oh, thought you were going to say the 5-star.
No. 5-star frog splash, right? Of course. Which is just the 5 stars that you make when you spread eagle. Rob Van Dam does a version of this
Where he turns in the air.
where it doesn't really matter. So usually with the frog splash, you kind of have to position the person so that they're perpendicular to you in the corner. But Rob Van Dam, he doesn't. He's like a honey badger. He don't give a shit. He'll go straight off of it, and he'll turn himself whatever way he has to be. Leo Rush also does that. D'Lo Brown, Cedric Alexander, Montez Ford does a version of it.
Yep.
It's kind of a way for bigger guys to look really acrobatic. Cedric Alexander comes to mind specifically. He's kind of a bigger guy.
Yep.
And Montez Ford as well. Diving stomp.
Oof. I do not know how they can do this without
This one
getting hurt.
looks rough.
Finn Balor does it.
What's it called?
The coup de grace.
Coup de grace. Yeah, that's what he calls it.
Literally, again, just as it sounds. You go to the top rope, you dive off, and you just lay both feet straight onto your opponent.
Yeah, basically the chest is what you're aiming
Yeah.
for. Now, I'm guessing that there's a lot of missing, meaning that you sort of hit, but then you continue moving forward, and if they fall
Glance
down,
off.
it becomes like
Yeah.
a glancing blow. But this is one I wince every time I
Yeah,
see.
it's hard to do when your opponent's already laying on the mat.
I mean this is one that is just
Riho, she does one too, but she's 97 pounds.
yeah, it's a lot easier to get away with when you don't weigh 200 pounds. I would take one of those from Riho,
Absolutely.
but I would not take one of those from Finn Balor. Shooting star press.
So pretty. It's a gainer. Go to the top rope and do a
Yes.
backflip forward.
It's basically, a standing gainer where you're allowed to land on your belly. So it's actually quite a bit easier than a gainer is. But yeah, you go to the top ropes, you jump forward, but you kick your feet in front of you, and you essentially do a backflip, and the idea is you land almost like you're doing a frog splash on
Billy
top of the person.
Kidman made it look effortless.
Billy Kidman, actually invented by Jushin Thunder Liger.
I did know that. Yep.
That is a name that I'm proud to say. I'm like scrolling through all these moves, and I'm like, that guy did like a billion. I see everybody else's name in here. I see Ultimo Dragon. I see Rey Mysterio. I see where the hell's Jushin Thunder Liger? There he is.
Yep.
He's right there. Famously, there's a very famous botch associated with this move that I had to
Brock
remind
Lesnar.
myself of. Brock Lesnar botching it.
Concussing himself, knocking himself out.
He did a whole bunch of stuff to his spine and stuff too. That was at WrestleMania 20?
19, I think.
19. Yeah, who was he doing that on?
Angle. Kurt Angle.
Kurt Angle, that's right, yeah. Man, yeah, it looks... We will not be showing that video. We're going to be showing a good example of a shooting star press. Also can be done when your opponent is laying on the mat and they basically do a standing shooting star press,
yeah.
usually into a pin,
Yep.
which also looks pretty good. Let's see. Oh, I also want to note that there's a corkscrew version of that one. A corkscrew shooting star press. Usually Pac
Oh,
does
yeah.
that.
Yep,
Where he'll
the,
do
Black Arrow.
like a twist and a half or
Yeah,
something.
it's just
on
a
top
twisting
Of it.
shooting star. Yep.
Yeah, basically they use the momentum of the snap. I'm sorry. Yeah, they turn it into a backflip. Yes, Black Arrow, that's what it's called. Also, Will Ospreay and Commander, also infamous for doing that. Will Ospreay, probably the best working wrestler under the age of 25 right now.
Is he still that young?
Yeah, I think
Oh my
he's-
gosh.
I
I thought he was older than that.
No, he's 23, 25, something like that.
Wow.
So, not surprising. Diving Hurricane Rana.
Ooh, I'm going to say that one came from Mexico. And yeah, you dive off the top rope or off the apron, wrap your legs around your opponent's head and whip your body around and just kind of flip them around.
Yeah, it's kind of like a flying head scissors.
Yep.
This is a move that you see in a lot of action films, that women do in a lot of action
Yes.
films. They do. You see it you'll see, I'm sure if you look in every movie, Black Widow, Scarlett Johansson's in, she does this to some perpetrator. Lita did a version of this.
The Lita Karana, yeah.
Obviously, Rey Mysterio popularized a springboard version of this. It's what the old West Coast Pop used to be. Now West Coast Pop is, in his age, it's become much more tempered.
Yeah.
And not nearly as exciting. So primarily Lita, and again, the idea is you're doing it from the top rope, so it becomes high risk. honestly, Huracan Ranas with the right person, I had to do. There's videos of me doing Huracan Ranas and stuff, which is really cool.
That's a tease to put that on screen.
Maybe the video. It's a long time ago. The video quality is very bad. It might just look like two blobs shifting around
That's
each
me
other.
right there.
Yeah. See the red? That's me. I got bloody from it. But yeah, but doing it from the top ropes, that takes it to a whole new level. Typically, your opponent is sitting on the top ropes when you do it.
Well, that's a little different. That's a Frankensteiner.
Funny you bring that up. No, because the Frankensteiner has to do with how you move, not how your opponent moves. Your opponent effectively moves the same way. The person taking the move effectively moves. It's how you move. There's
right.
There's no spinning motion in a
Generally, the
Frankensteiner.
Frankensteiner, is from your opponent sitting on the top rope, whereas the diving Hurricanrana is you jumping off the top rope.
Yeah, usually there's an angle to it where you are. You really. I have this argument with wrestlers on occasion. My theory is you cannot do a Frankensteiner off the. Like, you have to do a Frankensteiner on the ropes.
Yes.
The whole point of a Huracan Rana, especially a standing Huracan Rana, is you are spinning off to the side. So you can be as tall or taller than your opponent and get away with it. You can't do that with a Frankensteiner. You'll break your neck if you do that. Because a Frankensteiner is basically head on.
Right. And I think there's a difference too. I might be wrong about this, but a Huracan Rana, usually you're grabbing your opponent's head with your knees, whereas it's called a TRS, is when you grab your opponent with your ankles. So there's slight differences between.
Yes, and one of the reasons you see that is because, like I said, your opponent has to be sitting on the turnbuckles. So unless you are 6 feet, 6.5 feet, 7 feet tall, you're not going to be able to get up there. You're going to need to use your ankles. And actually, this is one of those moves. I mean, there's several moves in here where you really need to have good coordination with whoever you're working in the ring with. But this one, and especially, it really, because you're not. This is one, and the Huracan Rana too, where it can be sold very poorly.
Right.
You need to be in line with your opponent, because if you lose, there's very little grip on the neck. If your feet come loose and they're still going, it can totally botch the move. I mean, these ones are pretty risky from a kayfabe standpoint.
Right.
But yeah, this is one obviously made famous by Scott Steiner. There's a handspring version. You saw a lot of these. These were very popular back in the late 90s. Ultimo Dragon, Rey Mysterio. I mean, all these, basically any Mexican-styled wrestler from the 90s. Sunset Flip.
Sunset Flip, I think, is a pretty old move.
They look good.
I seem to remember that happening in like the early 80s, even the 70s, seeing it. So an opponent usually running, sometimes springing over the ropes, but they flip over their opponent, grab their waist, and roll through into a pin.
Yes, there's typically these days you'll see it as almost like a springboard move where you're using the ropes as leverage to jump over. You'll see a lot of like shoulders into the ribs between the ropes, and then they go over the top to get the pin flip. However, there is a standing version which looks suspiciously like a Canadian destroyer, where you hook their leg, their arms.
They call that the code red
in
now.
your legs.
Yep.
Yes. We'll get into more detail on that later, but when you land it back first, they refer to it as a Rana.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which is something else you don't see too often, but very common. You'll see it in probably 80% of matches. There'll be some kind of sunset flip move as like a quick roll up.
I could be wrong, but I could swear I've seen it in the past during, a black and white broadcast of.
Yeah, it's one of those.
It's an old.
And it's relatively low risk, but it is acrobatic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think a match has ever ended in a sunset flip pin.
Not anytime recently, no.
It's one of those ones where they pin and it's like, yeah, they're kicking out. Moonsault.
Oh, man. A backwards dive off of the top rope.
Seems
or standing.
Seems like everybody does. That's kind of the way if you're a big dude and you want to show your athleticism.
Hugh Morris, Bam Bam Bigelow.
Keith
Lee.
But that's the first thing you say. You're like, man, he does a great moonsault, and he weighs 300 pounds.
Kurt Angle did one off the top of a cage and missed.
Yes, we will not be showing that spot either. That's a rough one. But yeah, basically you stand opposite with your back to your opponent. This is a common, what do we want to call it? This is a common reversal, where because your back is to your opponent, you can't see him, you assume he's there, they roll out of the way, and you do a massive front bump.
Yep. And you can hit your opponent whether they're standing or laying down.
Yep. Generally, it's from the top turnbuckle, but there's a billion different variations, as you mentioned. Plancha.
Plancha, that's just a crossbody from inside the ring to the outside.
Yeah, you typically, guys will, you see this a lot from Ricochet.
Slingshot over the ropes.
Yeah, you'll see this a lot from Ricochet or really any of the more acrobatic guys. Ricochet likes to do where he bounces off the opposite ropes and sort of runs and does a dive. There's a lot of springboard, again, where you're pulling on the ropes, just like the sunset flip to get over, typically onto two different opponents, depending on the size differences. Yeah, big lucha libre. Basically, anytime you throw yourself outside of the ring. Plancha is kind of the idea of sort of being perpendicular to your opponent, like you're hitting them crossbody. But there's times where guys will do moves over it and they'll add a corkscrew to it and they'll hit him with their back. That's still considered a plancha, technically speaking. What about a suicida?
Suicida, just running full force, diving through the ropes.
The
to the
idea
outside.
is you're committing suicide, right?
Yep.
Devil may care is another way that they reference it. But yeah, typically corkscrews are added to it. One very important thing, they're going over the top ropes.
Right.
When they do it, one of Matt's pet peeves, because when they don't do it over the top ropes and they do it through one of the middle ropes, what's that called?
That's a tope suicida.
It's called a tope suicida, which is actually Spanish for headbutt.
Oh.
Tope, headbutt.
Okay.
So that's where that comes from. So this is one of Matt's pet peeves. If you're ever watching wrestling along with us with Matt, oftentimes they'll call something a suicida when they go through the ropes. No, it's a tope suicida.
Right. And it always bothers me when, like, Seth Rollins does it all the time, where he'll do a tope, but then he'll land on his feet, and it just doesn't sell it for me.
Say that again?
Seth Rollins will do a tope, but he lands on his feet
Oh, yeah,
instead
yeah.
of fully
Yeah.
committing.
Actually, you see that a lot. Yeah, they'll kind of...
John Moxley, he's another one that does that.
They don't really... I guess, yeah, they're not going with enough force, and their feet kind of drag. I imagine that has a little bit to do with courage and a little bit to do with who you're doing it to. If there's a high level of trust there, if there's a big weight differential.
Right.
I have a feeling if Seth Rollins is doing that with Braun Strowman, he's got a lot more confidence. All right, two more. This one, I wanted to try and find one to trick you. Okay? It took some digging, but maybe this one will trick you. Shiranui.
Never heard of that before.
Okay, perfect. So, well, I'll read the description that I found, and you can picture it in your head, and all the rest of you just watch the video below. It's a backflip inverted facelock drop, where the wrestler puts the opponent into a 3/4 facelock, then runs up the corner turnbuckles or ring ropes and jumps backwards, performing a backflip and landing face down, driving the opponent into the mat.
A sliced bread?
Yes, there it is. So I knew if I described it. Sliced bread number 2.
Yep.
And who is that?
Brian Kendrick.
That is Brian Kendrick. That's why we call him the professor. I give him the original Japanese version, and then he translates it into English for us. Yes, and that is one that I've seen. I don't know why we don't see it more. It looks great.
Yep.
It's a soft bump for everybody.
I think it was it Ultimo Dragon who did one standing on the mat?
Yes, there's a standing variant on it.
Kalisto is another one who did that
And
too.
if you're small enough, now there's some reverse versions too, where you take the opponent and you sort of flip them the other way, and then you jump over them instead of going backwards over them.
Okay.
That one I think I've seen more. But yeah, we really should see more. I'd love to see more sliced bread.
Yeah, that's a good move.
That's a fun one. All right, I had to include what is probably my favorite move, the Canadian Destroyer.
Oh my God. It's a shame that it's become more of a transition move now, but
It is so cool.
it is so cool. Petey Williams in TNA back in the day. He's the one who invented that move, and it's a flipping pile driver.
Yeah, and the idea, what makes it so cool for me is I am always surprised when I see it. It's almost never a big setup with a pile driver, with a suplex. There's almost always a really big setup with it. But with this one, it's like a reversal.
Yep.
A lot of times you'll see guys come up to the top ropes and they'll come down for like a double axe handle, and the guy will be set up the other way and he'll stand up and get flipped around, or vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, the Young Bucks do it. Adam Cole does a version of it.
It's
The
a
Lucha Brothers.
It's a pile driver like maneuver, but again, it's one of those moves where your opponent does most of the work.
Yes.
You're standing there and you're holding him, but he's got to stand up, and he's got to stand up hard, and he's got to flip backwards, and basically it turns into like a jumping reverse pile driver. And when it's done right, it looks outstanding. Actually, it was Amazing Red that's credited with inventing it.
Really?
And he named it. He allowed Petey to take the name because Petey loved it so much. He basically used it constantly. But yes,
Interesting.
TNA, and I did find a short video on that one, so we'll show Petey doing it in the six-sided ring,
Nice.
which is another little homage there. Yeah, that's it. That's all of them. So I hope the next time you watch a clip of wrestling or you see something, I know we share a lot of different clips on Facebook and Twitter and stuff, or when we're doing our commentary during our live streams, which you guys need to check out with us the next time we do one. You're going to see a lot of that kind of stuff. Hopefully you're a little bit more knowledgeable over what's going on. And we'll be doing more of these as time passes.
Oh, yeah, we still got to talk about the Ushigoroshi.
There's like a million different ones, but yeah, we're going to need you to translate a lot of these too. But you know, I'm fascinated. Again, I always talk about. I think we talked about this a little bit with our video on the straight edge video, but it's just interesting how the cultures meld.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we just talked about these 15 moves, very different styles. We got Mexican influence, we got Japanese influence, we got American influence, moves going back to the 80s. You got different time periods melding together. It's like wrestling's just this one big cultural melting pot where you can go into the ring and it's like nobody owns any one move. You can go in there and do any combination. It really enhances the creativity of the event, which I think is really what makes it super interesting. It's like
definitely.
a palette with an endless set of paints, and you can make whatever you want with it. I don't know. Maybe that's a little too artistic, but that's why I like it.
We're getting deep here on Falls Count Anywhere.
All right, guys. Check out our main show. Comes out every Friday evening around 6:30. You keep watching. We'll keep wrestling with the business.